chair now recognizes Mr. Carter for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank all of you for being here. This is extremely important and extremely important to all of our citizens. I want to start by saying that, when we talk about deep fake and cheap fake, to me that's somewhat black and white. I can understand it, but Mr. Hurwitz, when we talk about dark patterns, I think that's more gray in my mind. And I'll just give you an example. I was a retailer for many years, and I grew up in the South, okay? We had a grocery store chain, some of you may be familiar with it, Piggly Wiggly. Now, I always heard that the way they got their name, and I tried to fact check if I couldn't find it, but anyway, I always heard the way they got their name is they arranged their stores to when you went in, you had to kind of wiggle all the way around before you could get back out so that you'd buy more things. It was like a pig wiggling through the farmyard or something, and they came up with Piggly Wiggly. Well, that's marketing, and another example is all of us go to the grocery store. When we're at the grocery store and you're in the checkout line, you got all these things up there that they're trying to get you to buy. They're not necessarily, or you could argue that they're impulse items, but then again, you could also make the argument that when you get home, you say, geez, I wished I would have gotten that at the grocery store. I wish I would have gotten these batteries or Band-Aids or whatever. How do you differentiate between what's harmful and what is beneficial?
Great question, because it is gray. And as I said previously, dark patterns, the term itself is a dark pattern intended to make us think about this as dark. There are some clear categories, clear lies, clear false statements, where we're talking about classic deception. That's pretty straightforward. But when we're talking about more behavioral nudges, it becomes much more difficult. Academics have studied nudges for decades at this point, and it's hard to predict when they're going to be effective, when they're not going to be. In the FTC context, the deception standard has a materiality requirement, so there needs to be some demonstration that a practice is material to the consumer harm, and that's a good sort of framework. If we don't have some sort of demonstrable harm requirement and causal connection there, I'm a law professor, causation is a basic element of any legal claim. If you don't have some ability to tie the act to the harm, you're in dark waters for due process.
So do you think we should be instructing the FTC to conduct research on this as to what is going on here?
I think more information is good information. The FTC is conducting some hearings already. I think greater investigation is very powerful, both so that the FTC understands what they should be doing so they can use this information to establish rules. Where materiality is difficult to establish, the FTC can issue a rule, go through a rulemaking process, which makes it easier to substantiate an enforcement action subsequently. And even to respond in part to a previous question, to the extent that one of the FTC's core powers, even if it doesn't lack this as an enforcement authority, is to report to this body and say, look, we are seeing this practice, it is problematic, we don't have the authority, can you do something about it? And perhaps this body will act and give it power, perhaps this body will take direct action, or perhaps the platforms and the other entities will say, oh wow, the jig's up. We should change our practices before Congress does something that could be even more detrimental to us.
Right. Mr. Harris, did you have something?
Yes, I've studied this topic for also about a decade. So you asked what's different about this. You've got the pig going through the thing, you've got the supermarket aisle, you've got the last minute purchase items. There's two distinct things that are different. The first is that this is infrastructure we live by. This when you talk about children waking up in the morning and you have autoplay, that's not like the supermarket where I occasionally go there and I just made some purchases and I'm at the very end of it and that's the one moment, the one little micro situation of deception or marketing, which is okay. In this case, we have children who are like spending 10 hours a day. So imagine a supermarket, you're spending 10 hours a day and you wake up in that supermarket. And that's the degree of intimacy and sort of scope in our lives. That's the first thing. The second thing is the degree of asymmetry between the persuader and the persuadee. So in this case, you've got someone who knows a little bit more about marketing, who's arranging the shelf space so that the things in the top are at eye level versus at bottom level. That's one very small amount of asymmetry. But in the case of technology, we have a supercomputer pointed at your brain, meaning like the Facebook news feed sitting there, and using the vast resources of 2.7 billion people's behavior to calculate the perfect thing to show you next, and to not be discriminate about whether it's good for you, whether it's true, whether it's trustworthy, whether it's credible. And so it knows way more about your weaknesses than you know about yourself, and the degree of asymmetry is far beyond anything we've experienced.
And you
in
want the
history.
federal government to control that?
I think we have to ask questions about when there's that degree of asymmetry, about intimate aspects of your weaknesses, and its business model is to exploit that asymmetry. It's as if a psychotherapist who knows everything about your weaknesses uses it with a for-profit advertising business model.
The challenge is that can also go the other way. It can be used to strength. Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Mr. Harris used the example earlier of what if autoplay is shifting us towards conspiracy theories? Okay, that's a dark pattern. That's bad. What if instead it was using us to shift us the other way, to the light, to greater education? If we say autoplay is bad, then we're taking both of those options off the table. This can be used for good. And the question that you asked about how do we differentiate between good uses and bad, that's the question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.